So, we'll turn your microphone, Robert, Don, you want to turn your microphones on there? Audience members, panel members, please shut off your cell phones, so at least they don't ring. So time being 4 o'clock, I'll call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Healy, Heine, Kettering,
Here.
Loest,
Here.
Nelson,
Here.
Welsh, Catholic, Burns,
Here.
Hornstra.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum present. At this time, any member have a financial or a non-financial conflict of interest to declare? Robert, go ahead and start.
Burns, no. Kettering, no.
Loest, no.
Horstler, no.
Nelson, no.
All right, there being no conflicts. Agenda.
Yeah.
If there are no additions, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I make a motion?
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Agenda is approved. And the minutes from the March 7th meeting. Any corrections? Entertain a motion to approve.
Move approval. Second.
So I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. The minutes from the previous meeting are approved. And I'll let Mr. Healy go ahead and sit down. If you'd pop that microphone on there, Mr. Healy, and I'll ask you if you have any conflicts to declare.
Healy, none.
All right, did that turn on? There you go.
Healy, none.
Thank you. Mr. Healy has no conflicts. So,
Something new already today.
all right, we are to public comment. And in the past meetings, we've had some really good public comment. If you have any additional comments you'd like to make, I see a lot of familiar faces. So if you have any additional comments, go ahead and come to the podium, state your name. If you would just like to listen as we go along, that's fine too. And if you would, keep it to 3 minutes if you can.
Terry Clark, and I've been to the last couple meetings, so I have a little bit of an idea what's been going on here. I just wanted to say, last meeting we ended up with a discussion regarding the possible ban of commercial wind facilities with the idea to protect migratory birds as the main reason for that. And that would be from death caused primarily by the wind vortices that trail behind the turbines for significant distances, where the turbulence injures the birds and the negative pressure pockets actually collapse their lungs and kill them. And we had a discussion about were there any regulations that could be passed that would, or rules that would help, and came to the conclusion that there really is no regulatory fix for this problem of the vortices. Talked about height restrictions not being effective because the birds do come down and land. I did a little bit of research on the migratory birds in our area, and per the Audubon Society, they have an interactive map online. There's at least a dozen migratory bird species with confirmed presence in our area. That is, they've been tagged and followed. The species include bald eagles, red-tail and Swainson hawks, American white pelicans, osprey, blue-winged teals, lesser yellowlegs, buff-breasted sandpipers, whooping cranes, greater white-fronted geese, marbled godwits, and turkey vultures. That was on their site, and other migratory birds from other sources that I know of, ruby-throated hummingbirds, snow geese, and red-winged blackbirds. Also, there's the monarch butterflies who migrate through here. Hard to find good estimates or solid estimates of the number of birds killed from these things. There's a wide variety of estimates, and they focus on collisions with the turbines, and it doesn't appear that there's been any studies about the deaths from these vortices, which appear to be probably more of a problem. The estimates range that I saw ranged from 140,000 a year to 700,000 a year. I believe that's United States only. But like I said, that's a huge range there. The main thing, even the Audubon Society says they just recommend not siting these wind turbines in the migratory areas. So even groups that advocate for the windmills, the wind farms, do say that you shouldn't site them in a known migratory path. I do have some screen clips of the map from the Audubon Society I can share with you. I'll just leave those here afterwards. They show the past, they show which species and how prevalent they are in this area. Let's see. I also wanted to research, what other municipalities and local and state governments had actually banned wind turbines. And interestingly, I found this very, very difficult information to find. Just very difficult to find. After a couple days worth of research, I did find one report. It was by USA Today. It was actually from February of this year that had a map of states and counties that had banned commercial wind. There are 5 states currently, as of 2023, that have banned wind, big commercial wind farms, and a total of 411 counties. Now, those 411 counties are actually, some of those are included in those states. They counted them, so they're sort of counted twice there. They also mentioned, besides all-out bans, there's been an increase in regulations on these wind turbines that, through the regulatory process, actually have put limits on them in one form or another. They said the number of bans and the number of more stringent regulations are rapidly increasing and, in fact, are expanding much faster than new installations. Regulatory controls that are being used in various places include zoning, buffers, setbacks, noise regulations, design standards, and special use permits. We had some discussion in this group earlier about different aspects that you're looking at to put in your ordinance. Here are some of the commonly required items for permitting. A decommissioning plan, surety bonds for decommissioning, liability insurance, economic development agreements, transportation and road use agreements, environmental assessments, erosion control plan, maintenance plans, emergency plans, communication plans, vegetation plans, sound studies, visual impact analyses, flicker analyses, certification of design compliance, and certification by qualified engineer. So those are things that are commonly included in the regulations in various counties. And let's see, I have a copy of the Indiana Renewable Energy Community Planning Survey and Ordinance Inventory Summary, where I got some of this information, and I'll make that available to you. It has some good information. I left out the community planning survey part, but kept in the part about the ordinances, and I thought that might be helpful. And finally, I just want to say that this wind and solar, the renewable energy, is kind of the new gold rush. And South Dakota is on the map as being one of the fastest growing areas for this. So we're in kind of a boom right now for this, a gold rush if you like. Let's see, I wanted to share something interesting I found along the way. Let's see if I can find it. I have a size comparison of what these towers look like compared to some structures you might be familiar with. For example, the Statue of Liberty is 305 feet tall, and the Eiffel Tower is 1,063 feet tall, and the Empire State Building is taller than that. But these new generation turbines, they're showing 853 feet, which is really getting close to the size of the Eiffel Tower, so, and well over the size of the Statue of Liberty. So that can give you sort of a visual reference there of what we're talking about. So I have, that has also on there. So see if I missed anything. Oh, yeah. I'll also share with you, I'll just leave for you to see, peruse through at your time. I found some maps of where existing turbines are and what the densities are and what they look like and how many there are. And I found this very, very interesting. In the United States, there's over 73,000 turbines right now. I've got a picture of that. Iowa looks like they've got nearly 10,000. They're one of the states that has embraced wind energy. And if you can see this, it's kind of blankets the state. Marshall, Minnesota, between Marshall, Minnesota and Brookings, there's a big line of these things. Be hard to see from this distance. Like I said, I'll leave these for you, but there's over 1,000 of them, and there is a town right in the middle of all that named Ivanhoe, and I don't think I would want to live in Ivanhoe, surrounded by 1,000 of these. Nebraska, Wayne, Nebraska, 342 turbines. Neely, Nebraska is surrounded by 449 turbines in, these are like 3 or 4 projects surrounding a single town. Individual projects can be big, around 100 to 200 turbines apiece. South Dakota currently has over 2,000 turbines, according to this source. So compared to some of the other states, not as much. But like I said, they're fast growing now. The Tyndall area has about 100 of them. That's probably our nearest by one. So looking at those, it just looks like the states that are embracing green energy are just blanketed in these things. There's towns that are surrounded by hundreds of these, nearby. And it just gives me an idea of what South Dakota will look like if we embrace this energy, green energy, and our state could be covered just like Iowa, especially with this new push, this new gold rush rushing in. I'd just like to say that it does feel like a gold rush to me, and I would advise caution and moving slowly, and I would advocate for a ban at this time, and that can always be reversed later if things come to light. But from what I can see, the push on all these regulations and banning is in response to this rapid development, and if they weren't a problem, I don't think we'd be seeing this kind of push across the Midwest to start to ban and regulate these things. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Other comments at this time? Yes, sir. And if you came late to the meeting, mute your cell phone if you would. Hello.
I'd just like to talk about the reliability, how reliable wind energy is, and what it could do for the future of manufacturing in the state of South Dakota. Just 2 short examples of areas where there's been a lot of wind energy development. The first one is in Minnesota, and this would be about 3 winters ago. They had a cold spell that lasted about 10 days, and the electrical generation, the wind turbines couldn't keep up with the needs of the state. So what they did, part of the state was in a blackout because of the shortage of power, the other part of the state wasn't. It was about half Minnesota was, half wasn't. They moved people from the part of Minnesota where there was no electricity and put them up in motels in the other half. And that went on for 3 or 4 days. That's what happened in Minnesota. The other example is in London, and it would be about 3 or 4 years ago this happened. They have put a tremendous amount of wind energy development in England in the ocean. And around London, a lot of their wind generated power is from wind turbines that are in the ocean. And there was a period of 4 or 5 days where there wasn't any wind. A shortage of electricity in the system in London happened again. And this time, London's a city of about 10 million people, and probably 3 or 4 million of them go to and from work on the train system in London. Well, the power shut down completely. But what happened, what caused the power shutdown was lack of wind, and then the natural gas backup plant that they have wouldn't start. So if the natural gas backup plant would have started, there wouldn't have been a problem. But they couldn't get the thing started. It took them almost 3 hours to get it started. And during that 3-hour period, during rush hour in London, there was no electricity. All these several million people were on trains moving within the system in London, trying to get to their homes or suburbs, wherever they were. And London shut down. People were in these tunnels underground, hundreds of thousands of them, in the trains with no light, in complete darkness. The one funny thing about it, a lot of fights broke out on the trains between the smokers and non-smokers. But there is another problem with it. That's what happens if you depend too much on wind development. It hurts the economic development of a state. And if we move too much to wind, I think maybe 10 or 15 years down the road, you're not going to see the factory development here because of the inconsistency of the electrical production. Now, I'm from northeast Nebraska, and I've lived down in that area my whole life. And Nucor Steel is, when they first built in Norfolk, they were a small steel company. Now they're one of the biggest steel companies in the world. And they're building several new factories in the United States right now, but the two largest ones that they're building and employ about 1,000 people in each factory when it's done are being built in two states, West Virginia and Kentucky. And what do you think the common factor is in those two states? Reliable electrical generation from coal. So the other two states that they're building in are states that have green energy development in them, but the factories are rather small, maybe 300 employees in each one, where the other two factories are about 1,000. So I just think for long-term economic development for the state in the future, we're better off going with some of the other new technologies, like the small modular reactors that are being built and designed right now. Rolls-Royce is building a factory to build them. Westinghouse Electric is building a factory to build the small modular reactors. They're built, the reactors are built in the factories and then delivered on site wherever they're building the electrical productions. They're much safer. The old nuclear power was a little more dangerous because you had to have constantly pumping water to cool the nuclear rods down. With these new modular reactors, they're in a huge tank of liquid. Let's say 25, I'm just using an example, 25,000 gallons of liquid will keep that modular reactor cool without any water being pumped, so they're much safer than the old style electricity that we had. Plus, nuclear fusion is close, and I don't know, that might be 10, 20 years away yet, but the fission is the old style, and the new type of reactor, I think, is safe, and maybe South Dakota should think about the possibility of putting those in instead of massively developing wind turbines and then 10 or 15 years down the road, no factories will be built here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Additional comments before I close public comment? Yes, sir. Yes.
Robert, critique me and make sure I don't have some of my engineering numbers incorrect. Does a kilowatt hour run 1.36 horsepower?
1 horsepower is 746 kW.
Okay, I bet that's close if you reverse that engineering, but
Yeah.
A German test engineer friend of mine said a kilowatt hour is good for 1.36 horsepower, and I've got a 75 horse well, irrigation well, and the power company said that should draw about 60 kilowatt hours per hour. So that ratio comes out 1 kilowatt hour to about 1.25. So I think the engineer's number is correct. So that means 1 kW equal 1.36 horsepower. Well, you get to thinking about this, that means 1 megawatt equal 1,360 horsepower. Because a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. I attended a meeting in Center last Tuesday night, I believe, and their windmill company is proposing 130 windmill towers at 4.5 megawatts, which is 585 megawatts worth of generators. And so if you take that times 1,360 horsepower apiece, you're going to draw out of the atmosphere in 1 hour 795,600 horsepower worth of kinetic energy. So you've got to ask yourself the question, how is this affecting our climate, or how could it affect our, not the climate, but our local weather? Because I could pump a lot of water with this many kilowatt hours. So you carry it on to 24 hours and then maybe take it times 10 days of 24 hours, and you have drawn out 190,000, no, it's 190,944,000 horsepower worth of kinetic energy out of the atmosphere to run them turbines. So I would really want to know from a power company if they've analyzed this in any way to determine what's that going to do in 10 days when you pull that much energy out. Well, you got the turbines turning, they're mixing the air so it doesn't stratify as much, and pulling that much horsepower out. But it's imperative that you have air stratification to create the drafts in a thunderstorm. And you got to have a draft going up, and as it goes up, it cools and it condenses, and you get a thunderstorm going, you know, and the humidity and the hot and the cold clash and things kind of come apart, and it turns the humidity in the air into rain, and we grow a good crop. One other article that I ran across was that the Associated Press reported a study in the areas of wind farm that it's warmer at night. And if anybody's raising corn, they know it's imperative that corn crop cools at night so it can rest, and also the cooling shrinks the cells in the leaves that are turgid with carbohydrates. It shrinks them up, pumps that stuff down in the stalk, and if it gets cool enough to penetrate the dew point, you also get a nice dew, and then a little after sunrise, that dew starts to evaporate, creating a cooling effect on the corn, squeezing those cells right down to the last. And the sun comes up, dew evaporates, and is ready to go back to work again, make some more kernels of corn with that sugar water. So this is just an intriguing thing that I dreamed up. Guys, Robert asked me when I came in the door, said, "You're getting quite a mileage investment in this. I'm from Wayne, Nebraska. What's up?" I've got a lot of electric wells, approaching 30 of them. And one year, the power company sent me a text, said, "We're going to have critical peak pricing here in about 2 hours." Well, I got all these pivots I got to go around, shut off. I better get going. So I drive around, shutting them off, checking them and shutting them off, and I'm about half done. They sent me another text. Critical peak pricing has been extended till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. About another 2 hours. And okay, backtrack, start them all back up again. And I wait a couple hours and I start the same process. And the same thing, and I get about halfway done, And they call me up, critical peak pricing been extended. Now I'm mad. I'm wasting my whole day. So I called my power company. Now, what the hell's going on today? They said, well, we don't know, but that's what we get from Nebraska Public Power, that we don't know what's going on, but they send us a message and we relay it out to you guys. So who do I talk to down there? She gave me a name. Then what's his phone number? Then she gave it to me. And I wrote it down on the console of my pickup. You know, I might have to call this guy again. So I called him up. I said, here's what happened to me today. What's going on? What's the cause of that? And he said, well, the wind was supposed to die down, so we gave you a heads up, and it didn't, and they changed their forecast. So we gave you a little more time so you could pump. Then, well, the wind kept blowing, and so they gave us a little more time so we could pump. And I don't know that they ever did shut us down, but I lost time, pumping time, good pumping time, you know, on the lower rate because I shut off because the wind was supposed to die and the turbines were supposed to drop out, and they're gonna call critical peak based on that. So, you know, carry it a step further, and if I got too many wells, they're shutting us off because, boy, they can shut off a lot of kilowatt hours. We got great big motors, you know, 60, 75, you know, they shut a bunch of us off. Boy, they can relieve a lot of pressure, and they give us a discount price for us to sign up to do that. So that's why I'm here, people. This is nuts. We're spending so many millions of dollars on undependable energy when we could be spending something, or at least investing in some research on something dependable. That's what we gotta have, because we depend on energy. We don't live in teepees anymore. We don't live in teepees on the weekends or whenever, you know. So that's why I'm here, people. I'm just passionate about this. This is just nuts. Let's spend all this money on undependable energy.
Thank you. Other comments? Sir? If you come, state your name at the microphone, please.
My name is Cole Monin, and I grew up in Parkston, South Dakota, so good afternoon, everybody. I grew up in Parkston, South Dakota, and I appreciate and respect everybody's opinion, but I just wanted to come and speak on behalf of my experience with wind energy, and the fact that growing up relatively local to here and moving back to the community has been very important to me. I went to college at the University of Wyoming and then took a job in wind energy right out of college, so I've been in the industry for about 15 years. I'm a senior operations manager for Vestas, which is one of the #1 wind turbine manufacturers in the world. About 5 years ago, or in 2018, I had the opportunity to move my family back here, and I managed a facility called Grand Prairie Wind Farm in O'Neill, Nebraska, and chose to move my family here to Yankton just because of my local ties to growing up in Parkston and living in South Dakota. I've got 5 kids. They all go to, well, the younger ones don't, but the older kids go to school here in town. I was the president of the Youth Soccer Association for 4 years, a little over 4 years here in Yankton. And I understand people's passions. I understand, you know, and respect German engineering, what West Virginia's doing, what the Midwest is doing, but I also respect Yankton and Yankton County. And I'm here to tell you that industries like this bring jobs to areas like this for young folks to live in the areas, raise kids and good paying jobs that are in the area, to stay home and stay local, go to trade schools, and be able to work in the towns that they grew up in. You know, Tyndall, Yankton, some of these towns around here, and guys like me that grew up in the area and have been able to move back and make a career out of this. So I just wanted to tell you that I'm very pro wind energy for what it's done for myself and for my family, and to be able to live in this area, and that you consider that when you're taking into account everyone else's information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I saw another hand back there. Did I see another hand go up? Someone else want? Yes, go ahead and come up.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Morkfee, and I have a couple of copies here if you want to take one and pass those down. So I have listened here, I've talked to many other people, about the pros and the cons. I know people who have lived areas that there is some where there is not some. And so my personal feeling is that we should just put a ban against it in Yankton County. That's my thoughts. I was actually at Swan Lake Christian Camp over the weekend on Saturday, and I was talking to them regarding this because it is going through Swan Lake area, and it'll be approximately 4 miles from where they're at. And a lot of things that they really enjoy there at the camp. They have people coming throughout the year doing different types of events there, and that's one of the things that they really enjoy seeing is a lot of the natural habitat. They see the deer, they see the migration of the birds, and those types of things. And that's one of the things that we were talking about. Jerry is one of the head people there. And so he said, when we were talking about how the vortex kills off the birds, we were talking about that, and he said, well, what about the eagles that come through here right after the migration of the geese, or sometimes with the geese? And as you heard Lori testify, they're flying all around where her property is. I live out by the river, and I see many of them out there. A lot of times, the eagles are out there all the time. So I did bring the U.S. Code talking about killing and possessing the migratory birds and being unlawful. And I won't take the time to go over everything. You're more than welcome to go ahead and look at that. But there is a part in here that I would like to say. It says, unless except permitted by regulations made hereby provided in the subchapter, it shall be unlawful at any time, by any means, by any manner, to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, attempt to take, capture, or kill, possesses, or for sale, la-di-la. But it's talking about killing these birds, the migratory birds, and specifically the eagles. That's one of the pages right here, and that would be U.S. Code 703. You'll see that. And if we have these eagles that migrate right through where we're talking about, then there's a very good chance that they will be killed. It's a very good chance that their area that they've already migrated to, that they have their nests, which it says here that you can't even move the nests. So if they're talking about disturbing their area where they're at, that is illegal by the U.S. Code right here. So that concerns me because eagles are protected, and that is another something we need to really think about at this point in time. The other thing I would like to suggest is that it be set back 5 miles from any participating or non-participating property lines. And then 5 times the height setback from all roads. Just as a precautionary, we went through everything last week and the week before where we covered a lot of, like if the ice is flying off, that was another thing that they were talking about even at Swan Lake when we were talking to them, is they're concerned about the ice. What about the ice that gets on those wind turbines and that goes flying? Last week it was brought upon, like, what if one of the turbines flies? What if it flies off? Nobody knows what the chances are that it's going to fly off. Nobody knows. I mean, whoever invented them obviously was a good engineer because they're huge to be able to do that. But if for some reason something does fly off, and then I would like to ask too, how much is this going to help Yankton County residents who are here that would be affected by that, whether it be REA or city? How many of us are going to be able to see that this is going to help us and not cause our electric bills to go up any higher than they've already gone up? I know a lot of people in the county. I know a lot of people over in Turner County. I know people over in Bon Homme County. I know people over in Vermillion and Parkston and Tripp and Freeman, and everybody's it's skyrocketing high. What about the people who are the elderly people that are trying to stay on their farms, and they have to pay their electric bills? So is this going to affect those electric bills, and how will it affect people's electric? Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Sir?
I am a farmer near Viborg, about 4 miles away from this proposed situation. Just to bring back on my storage bins, I have fans to be able to dry down corn if it goes in, or soybeans on the wet end. We can do it with fans. However, at one point, right now my bins are empty because I'm raising another crop, so I don't use those bins. But every day I get a communication from the rural electric company indicating that the electricity to those fans will be shut off for a period of time. And then a little bit later, a few hours later, there's another thing comes on my phone that says the power's back on again. And that sometimes happens twice a day. And at this point, we're in a situation where we are short of electric power. But dependability was brought up earlier, and to me that makes a whale of a lot of difference. We can't depend upon an air system to dry down our grain and so on if it's going to be turning on and turning off. And I think Texas was one of the states that found out what it's like to depend upon wind turbine time, because they had a very bad cold weather situation that ended up shutting down all of the solar and wind systems. And that happened as a result of a lot of people either being killed or injured quite badly. So I look at wind power as being something that could end up being quite something not to depend upon. And to me, that is something that we can't afford, at least in the agricultural industries, to run without electric power. And if all that power is going to end up being generated and all of a sudden it's not there, then that's when the system for my grain will be jeopardized. And so that's that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last call. Oh, I see 2 hands now.
Hi, my name is Patty Conrad. I haven't made the other meeting, so I'm sorry if I'm bringing things up that have already been discussed. I've not had a lot of time to do in-depth research. I just know of things that I've heard or things that I've read. One is the disposal. They don't have a very long lifespan on these wind generators or these wind farms. And then when it comes time to decommission them, you have to take them somewhere to a landfill. Now, I read an article a while back, there's only one landfill in this vicinity that accepts them, and that was in Sioux Falls. And they were accepting them from Minnesota, they were accepting them from Iowa, because there were no other landfills for them to be able to take their decommissioned wind towers to. And that would be a concern to me, because I'm assuming there's just a lot of stuff that these wind turbines are made out of that doesn't decompose. So you're filling up these landfills with these huge things that won't decompose. And if we get thousands upon thousands, well, in 10 years, those thousands upon thousands of wind turbines have to be taken somewhere to be disposed of. The other thing that I just took a couple notes while I was sitting there. Barrels and barrels of oil it takes to run each wind turbine. I don't have the number in my mind, but I've heard it's a lot. I'm sure you could probably answer that question. But if you're taking barrels and barrels of oil to run a wind turbine that's not green and is not renewable, And my question, that the lady there, what benefit will it be to Yankton County? We have a beautiful scenic county. We have a beautiful scenic state. And if we clutter it with these wind turbines, we're going to lose that. And I would be sad to lose that. On one of our trips, I go to Illinois quite frequently, driving through Iowa. I see wind turbines, I see them catching on fire. I mean, we make one trip, we came by, hey, Mom, look, that wind turbine's on fire. I don't know how often that happens, but it was enough to catch our eye, enough to be concerned about. And another article I read a month or so ago was an article on the possibility of wind turbines changing the weather. Not just thunderstorms, but an increased number of tornadoes. So I think these are all different things along. There have been some very good comments. Thank you to all of you that have done your research. I have not, but these are things that I've read about and am concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Hello, my name is Calla Harper. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for volunteering your time. Public service definitely takes time out of your schedules with your families, so thank you. And thank you for everyone who shows up, cares, and is interested in what's going on here. There's a lot of people in Yankton County that don't know what's going on, so thank you for taking the first step. I am a 5th generation Yankton County landowner. You'll see I am 26 years old. We have a little bit of an age differential going on here, and I think it's important that you hear from someone who will be here when this project is complete. I was approached with my Yankton County land. My Turner County land was not in the project for the Orion Renewables project, which started back in approximately 2019. So I'm on year 5 of being involved with this. Last night I attended the Zoom meeting for the new Swan Lake Wind project. And just to make sure, I was able to get confirmation from them that this was purchased from Orion Renewables. So we have already had one turnover on this wind turbine project within a 5-year time span. The existing landowner agreements will transfer. And many of our questions last night focused on the decommissioning process. Now, through Orion, I was never able to get a good plan, even when I had approximately 40 pages mailed to me, certified to sign a contract. Last night, once again, I was not able to get any answers. Through the Orion Renewables Turkey Ridge Wind project, they anticipated the minimum project timeline from construction to decommissioning to be 35 years. Okay, I'll be 61 years old, not even retired yet. The potential end time, 55 years. 81 years old, average lifespan for a woman, 80, 82. God willing, I'll still be here. We don't know what the consequences are. Landowners have signed these without anything in paper about what happens here, what happens to the turbine, how is our land reclaimed, and what about all that concrete that anchors that? They aren't just put in the ground like a tree. There has to be some sort of root system. Please bear with me on that. I've understood by some studies, now granted, I'm not an engineer, I don't work for a wind turbine company to have an exact number for every turbine, for every model, but an estimate of 600 square yards of concrete is put in for a turbine. Orion at one point told me off the books, they would take off the top 6 feet of concrete. That's a lot of yards of concrete that would be left in my 5th generation land. The other answers we weren't able to get was, there's a lot of drain tile around here. It's not all well marked. If you've done drain tiling, sometimes you pick the cheap guy and they slide it in where it needs to be. So this is my plea as the next generation that will be here, and there's future generations that will be here too, to please think about your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and what this means for them. I don't need to be a playground for out-of-state and foreign interests. I don't think Yankton County does, and I certainly don't think South Dakota does. Yankton County is not a means to an end. We have industry, we're doing well, we're growing. We don't need to accept every offer on the table. Now, if we regulate this properly, we can take the best of the best. Sure, let's take the cream of the crop of companies that do these things. But we don't need to accept any old offer for some promise of taxes, some promise of jobs. Now, the last thing I would like to mention is for the Swan Lake Wind Tower project, the Western Area Power Administration is taking public comment until April 12th. April 12th is your last day to submit. You can do so via mail, email, and fax, and you can find that form on their website. It's wapa.gov, but I would just use some keywords to try and get there. It's a rather long URL. So please get involved. Think about us. I will be here when this is over. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Other comments? All right, I will close public comment. I usually have one last hand that shoots up, so thank you all for that. And with that, we will bring it back for discussion. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. I was just going to comment that I'd like to thank Gary and Robert for summarizing our trip yesterday to Avon in that area. And they did a good job of summarizing it and presenting facts, and also to the Hornsters for their hospitality. So anyway, I thank them and appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. And last night, the last speaker mentioned that there was a public phone call on the Swan Lake. I did not have a chance to sit in on the call, but I inquired with them, and there should be a recording of that on their website next week. And so I think that was spp.org, southwestpowerpool.org, but I'm sure it'll be on the WAPA's website as well. So if you're interested in what was discussed, and I think the documents are to be made available as well. So next week sometime, maybe Wednesday, look there. Did any other task force members get a chance to call in?
I was on the Zoom.
You were?
I was on the
Okay.
Zoom, and interestingly enough, the way they handled it was they had a lady kind of running it, and she had a group of professionals from the company that's putting it, or from WAPA, and they take questions from call-ins or emails, and then they'd forward it to that committee to provide an answer, and then she'd read the answer. Interestingly enough, they didn't have the right experts to answer all the pertinent questions. And so this morning, I sent them a request to answer 5 or 6 questions, and then I asked, because there were probably 20-some, Lauren, 20-some areas where they couldn't answer because they didn't have the right professional. I asked that I have copies of their answer on all those things. But
It was Michael Welch. I saw his name come up 3 times, so he had 3 questions. And I had 2 questions that went through, but same thing as what you were just stating, that the answers were soft compared to what I was anticipating.
Gotcha. Did they give a total number of people who were participating? 100 callers in or anything like that? No? Okay. I was just curious.
They had a thing, it showed a little number, and I think they got in the high 50s of the calls in.
Okay.
Oh, so you saw, I didn't see that, okay.
Yeah, it was on my screen, computer screen. Pardon?
Okay.
The
Zoom shows the number of participants.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other comments about that? Lauren, did you have any comments?
Well, I was involved with the pump storage project out at Platt, and I sat in on their Zoom call or whatever that was, and I would agree. This one was just very loosey-goosey. We don't have the experts compared to that one, and I'm not sure why. What it was. I was very surprised last night at how many questions they weren't able to answer. Plus, also too, the ones they could answer, it was like this canned answer. Like, okay, if this question comes up, here's your script. Thank you for your question. That's a really good question. And then she would, give the answer to it. I got the sense of feeling like this is a done deal. That's the sense. I don't know how many people were able to listen last night. I got it was very like, this is a done deal, people. So sorry, Charlies. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
Well, they don't plan on start building until 27, and it takes them 5 years to complete it, so it's.
Because what's the name of the company? The one that has it now. Thank you, NextEra. Bought it in 2023, right? But yet they have Raptor and all this studies from 2021, which kind of confuses me a little bit. That so was that Orion's studies? So we just inherit those? We don't have to do our own? You know what I mean? It was just, yeah, it's really interesting. So, and, from what family that I know up there that has land, this is the second time it's been sold. So, so we'll see. But yeah, I mean, it was what it was last night. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of questions.
I'd say at this time, I'm neither a strong proponent or opponent of wind towers. I'm interested in doing something that the people in the county are gonna be happy with, and the issues on financial ends of it were never answered last night. Truly, people outside of this area are gonna get the main income.
Yep.
But on the other hand, who knows what we'll need for energy in 5 years? Maybe we'll wish we had them. I don't know, I can't answer that.
Okay.
Sure, just a couple comments from our tour at Prevailing Wind. It was a good tour, I'm glad we did it. One of the things I was interested in was, Bonhelm County is one place, we're a different one. They are 12 people per square mile compared to our 44. And that, to me, was important because it's the number of non-participants would be 4x. An average numbers versus there. And because the farm dominated the skyline of the entire area. And we had one of the landowners that was there, and he as a participant, he opted for it to be closer than the statute required, and he brought it in from the half mile to 3/8 or whatever it was, and he didn't have a problem with that. But when I look at having a structure of that size, that close to a house, it was like, wow. Okay, so, and I want to say something about our setbacks when we get to setbacks, because there is a downside of a big setback when it comes to pushing these things back. Just a quick, they said 765 765 yards of concrete in the base on those particular 3.87 megawatt units. What was good that they had was the radar. They had a good working radar station. They had F-16s messing around. They said they could see them on their radar. That radar was used, to turn the lights on and off, and could potentially be used to protect birds if they were incoming. So I think that should be a standard feature of what is allowed. It was a very professional organization. They had 2 permanent employees there and 6 that were coming in as contractors. So there is a long-term, it's not big compared to the economic footprint, but there is, there is an employee, long-term employee creation there. But otherwise, they ran a tight ship. Also the flicker and shadow analysis, it was kind of a cloudy day, we were there. But they said that they have software, that they have, he didn't mention residences, but I imagine that would be included. But that shadow and flicker on highways is a known deal. We know where the sun's gonna be and all these angles, and the computer's a lot easier than us. But when those things occur during the year, they actually will move the turbine or prevent the shadow flicker from happening with software in the wind farm. And again, that should be a standard feature of future farms that's required, because that's kind of a pretty significant concern that they're able to deal with technology, so that was good. So that was kind of the highlights, I think, that I saw. Gene, you had any other comments?
Oh, I would only make one comment. Thank you for your positive comments, and that would be relative to the people per square mile, which is greatly affected in Yankton County by our larger population center. So, of course, the number of people per square mile, you need to keep that in mind for average, which is kind of misleading the way you put it.
Sure. Well, it's just more people involved.
We could
Sure,
get more
Sherry.
accurate numbers.
Interestingly enough, this last week, I heard on the radio, I think it was the governor's office was talking about killing 750 or 800,000 pheasants in South Dakota last year. And we're talking about, in the whole United States, maybe 700,000 birds, maybe.
Good point, Don.
Sure, I was just going to follow up a little bit on Robert's comments too, from yesterday. And it's just the way it happens to be out there. Let's say that the local employees, 2 local employees from that area, the Hornstras, and then 6 others from GE or wherever they happen to be from, and even the gentleman here in the room tonight, none of them are really living in property that has a turbine on it, from my understanding. And the locations are quite some distance. So that I think is something that it's fine to be aware of that, because the human concern and welfare for those that are in those areas that may not have them, I think has to be primary, because we're here for all the residents of Yankton County, not just a few that have wind turbines with the return.
That's a great point, Mike, and he mentioned that the 57 turbines had 36 landowners involved, 20% of which did not live in the area. Is that what you're referring to, or the employees?
I was talking about the employees, but I think the other side of that is you're probably looking at more like 20% of the turbines, the owners of the land are in the area. 20%, not 80%.
No, I think he said 20%.
Pardon?
20% were not living in the area. 80% were.
No, but they're not, those that own the land are not living, and that do not have a turbine.
Okay. And then the final thing I wanted to mention was drain tile. They were saying 4 to 7 foot depth. It's the feeder lines primarily that connect the turbines that can cause that damage. They were going anywhere from 4 to 7 feet, and I think we paid pretty close attention to those in our discussion.
Another thing that wasn't noted, it wasn't discussed yesterday, but just for anyone that is looking at that, we can look at the turbine and its property at that point. but each one of these requires a road. And with the price of the crops where they are at this time, I think as we're looking from the finances, Don, and the consideration there, is if you take the width of the road, and if that was planted in crops, what is not being realized by the owner of the land for those crops, that would be returning each year that you're giving up. So another consideration. So, roads.
Okay. All right. We have had an hour discussion of public comment and just talking about a couple meetings, which is great. More information is better. So I went through before the meeting today to make a list of things that we either need to finish or still cover. So item 5 is setbacks. Item 6, electromagnetic interference. 13 is decommissioning. And there is a section 19 that's labeled technical issues and expert review. We did kind of make a list of things we were looking to add. One would be to consider a height limit, the flicker analysis, which is not currently in our ordinance. We talked about the endangered species, wetlands, migration. Our solar has a power purchase agreement, and mainly that focuses on the smaller units. Maybe they're not commercial, because we have to realize this goes down to 50 kW. And so if you have a farmer who's putting in 60 kW, to make sure that the local power company knows what they're doing, and they understand the requirements with that power. And we talked about drain tile. In definitions, I know we have to include participant and non-participant, because we added that to our setback discussion. So those are the things that we have to get our arms around before we can kind of put everything together, if you will. So let's start with setbacks, because that's where we ended up. And the red lines that were sent out to you had a table put in them, which makes it a little easier to follow. Some of the things we had discussed, some we didn't, so I did my best to decipher my chicken scratch to figure out where we kind of ended up talking. The original ordinance we have right now has a setback from residences at a quarter mile, which is 1320 feet. We talked about that being fine for a participant, but for a non-participant, we threw out the mile setback, the 5,280. I know some folks had mentioned 2 miles. I don't think we actually came to a conclusion at the last meeting, so I went ahead and put in a mile, just as a starting point. Municipalities, a mile. Lakes, rivers, and streams, a mile. And a lot of this is based on what we did for solar, so whatever this was, that was. We had right-of-way, which I do believe I have a circle around the 1.5 times the total height. And then we had property line, which we discussed, having a participant and a non-participant. The participant, we had discussed briefly 1.25, but we never came to a conclusion on the non-participant. I think that's about when our time was up. And then we also have a floodway. Right now, gosh, if I look at solar, I don't think you can put solar in a flood zone.
No, generally, they're always prohibited.
Right.
Other sections,
So wind towers are a little different, because, I mean, that'd be like putting up a cell tower in a flood zone. I think we obviously allow that, so I think wind is a little bit different. So that box is still an unknown, really. So, where do we want to start? Let's start with the participant and the non-participant setbacks. And this would be for residents, churches, businesses, et cetera.
Sherry, why wouldn't we want to have that also 5,280? When we're looking at recreation area, game production, historical, whatever it is.
Well,
Why
in
not
my,
have that to 5,000?
well, we haven't finalized the others yet either, so I think if we just start at the first list, because that's probably, the most important is the non-participants, because they are the ones that are affected the most.
So the residences, business school, okay, there's participating or non-participating?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So if you are a participating landowner, right now, our ordinance says it's 1320 for everybody, whether you participate or not. So I just put the 1320 in there as our starting point. Now, if you read before there, you can give yourself an exemption, and you could put it as close to your house essentially as you want, as long as it's far enough it doesn't fall on your house if something happens. So you can give yourself an exemption if you so choose.
Yeah, I think the participating is almost, I mean, maybe just like you said, general safety factor, but it's really up to, if they're a participant, whatever they decide is their business, really.
Yes.
I mean, you
So-
could do a 2 times tower height maybe, just as a safety factor. And all our heights, I think we should consider as total height, not hub height.
Yes, and it says the total
Right.
height, which matches our
Okay, so we're
definition.
using the same unit of measure for all of it as total height. And as it was pointed out, that what we saw in prevailing wind is already outdated. They're like solar panels, every 3 months, you can't get that one anymore because they've gone on to something bigger and better. So we should really think about these things in terms of being a minimum of 800 feet tall to the tip of the blades. So if we say 2 times height, I mean, that's 1,600 feet. And for someone looking at that, when we did yesterday, and to look just at that towering height compared to this little property, it's dominating, but, they want to live in the shadow of it because they're getting paid, that they can do that. So I think it should just be a height basis. I don't think we want to, we should have a minimum height basis.
You're talking for the participant.
Participating.
Okay, so here's an example from Cottington County. It says participating occupied residence, business, church, or school is 550 feet for towers up to 500 foot. If a tower is over 500 foot, it's 550 plus 2.5 feet per foot over 500 is how they do that.
Well, I think everything's over 500 now. I mean, even
Well, for the big ones, but remember again, we might have some other size tower that comes in. So we do have to write it for that as well.
If we just put a 2x height and they want it closer, then they could do that.
Thoughts?
Now, down below, we're talking participating and non-participating, but we're still up above, right?
We're at participating residents, so at the top of the chart.
Yes, and so one question would be is why do we have residents there if we have down below participating, non-participating?
Because that's the property line. So you could own land that is away from your house where you live, so to keep them away from your property, per se.
That's fine.
So that's why there's 2 categories. One is for where your home is, and one is for where your property line is.
But if we're looking at, let's say, a church or those, that would be like a residence.
Yes, so those would be grouped together, so it'd be residences, churches, businesses.
And so, and that's where I was looking at expanding that, right here. Expanding that. All these.
Okay, so for a participating and then a non-participating, so we have 2 different setbacks. So if you're a participating, that means you want wind on your property.
You get paid.
So, the general consensus in that is, if you want to be part of the project, you're probably very open to having it sit near your house and on your property.
See, I was looking at trying to address that as property line below and leave the residents out of it as far as the participants. So, but that's
Okay.
one.
I see what you're saying, Mike.
You know, I'm trying to simplify it.
That's not, typically, I don't think I've ever seen an ordinance written that way.
Okay.
So this is, I was thinking about this over the last week and changed my angle straight down. So if this is the turbine, and that's the residence, we've got, this is the non-participating, I think is the more critical one. Participating is gonna be a number that represents, but they can do whatever they want, I mean, ultimately.
So on your box up there, write non.
That's the house.
Yep,
No,
write
no,
non,
no,
just
no.
so everybody is following your,
Give enough room for the little chimney and the smoke.
perfect.
So we have the property line distance, and then the setback to the residence. So we're talking about setback to the residence.
Correct.
I would say this should be 2 mile, that's my opinion. However, when you do that, you create a dead zone here. Okay, and I think on most rural properties, it may not be a big deal. But you're saying that if the setback is a mile, say, whatever, okay, then here, you can't build a home within that. So in the healthy setback, I think is appropriate for a non-participant, but it creates this non-development zone.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop you there, because typically ordinances work that the permits are approved with people who live there today. So if that's put in, and I buy property between those two, I can build a home. And they can still occupy, use their permit, run their turbine, because I moved in second.
Okay.
So I am dependent, the tower is there, and I'm building a
And you know
home,
it going
and
in.
I know it
Okay.
going in, so I have no reason to complain.
Okay.
So
Well, that was-
typically, we don't worry about after the fact,
Okay.
but, and that's why we consider, Mike, to your point, the property line. Because if I own 20 acres out there today, and I have a plan to build a home in 10 years, and the wind turbines come in, the setback from the non-participating property line is for that. So at least you have some buffer there. That's why there's kind of 2 outlined there. But I don't live there today, so you can't, it's tough to penalize the wind development today for something that could happen in 10 years. So that's the balance between the needs.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear
You-
that, because
does that make sense?
Yeah, that would be a downside of a big setback if that.
It would be, so.
If that occurred.
So we have to write these guidelines, if you will, requirements for today. And not know, I mean, I could own 20 acres and never build a home. I could sell it, and, because I had to move. So, I mean, you have to protect both people's interest as best you can without penalizing one too harshly. And that's kind of how that's set up.
And still consider the future?
You do as much as you can, and that's with, if I own that 20 acres, I'm going to kind of be protected by some setbacks from a non-participating property line. But they probably aren't going to be as generous as if I had a home sitting there today.
So, just to make sure I want to make sure I understand this. If that were a section or a quarter?
Whatever.
Okay, if that were a section and the setback was 2,600, whatever it is, half, that'd be right in the middle, it could be placed. and I sold 20 acres in any one of these other quadrants, that easement would go with those other quadrants, wouldn't it? You selling those acres, the easement has to go with the property,
Yep,
okay?
yep. So it'd be no different than having a driveway easement.
Well, the only difference is and I can't prove this, but people say that your land's gonna sell for a hell of a lot less if you're right up next to a wind tower.
To the wind towers?
Yeah, and I don't know, the areas that,
So-
some say it is and some say there's no effect.
I would be pretty confident that if someone was looking to buy 20 acres to build a home, that would be true. Now, if they're looking to farm only, not as much influence. Could, but
And
not
you
as
got a
much
permanent
influence.
easement forever on that ground. It's someday, that's one of the questions I asked.
Mm-hmm.
After decommissioning, when does the company cancel the easement?
Let the easement go,
And I'll see what they say, but I understand it's
yeah.
a perpetual easement forever.
I would hope everyone has a lawyer to read those before they sign. So, back to our participating and non-participating residents, churches, businesses, etc. So on the participating, are we good with saying something like 1.5 times the total height? 1.1 times the total height, 2 times the total height versus a hard setback, like a quarter mile? I guess you can always give yourself,
I like the
The waiver.
1,320 feet.
you like the 1320, you can always give yourself a waiver.
I guess what question I have is, okay, residence is one thing, but there are those other areas like parks, recreation areas and all that, church. Why not break them out and have those at greater distance, let's say 5,280?
The argument against that is, and I went through this when we did some previous ordinance changes, that church, for the most part, is occupied certainly one day a week, Sunday, and then maybe some events. This residence is occupied 24 hours a day. So the impact, these folks have to put up with it less amount of time than the residents. So the argument always went back to the residents is there. That is their life, their home. That's where they go at night to relax, etc. They should have the biggest protection. Whereas a business is open 9 to 5, maybe. Parks are not used normally around here too much in the winter. So they're seasonal, if you will. So I'm just saying that's the argument there.
And I didn't include business in my comments.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so
But
Yep.
we're still talking about participating.
Participating, yes.
Participating. So that business, I mean, the folks in the cemetery probably aren't gonna mind, but the business or the school or these other ones are getting paid for this to be there.
If they're
Directly.
participating, yes.
So they have a financial interest in this, and it's, so really, at the end of the day, they can waive or do whatever they want. If the winds company says, hey, if you let us put it here, we'll give you X. They're in the cash flow on the project, so they have a vested interest. You know, so if the school or the church or whatever is being supported by this turbine, they have that opportunity to let it be wherever is best to locate the turbine. And I think that's appropriate. So I think the 1.5 just reflects the basic safety fall factor like we have on small.
I was hearing some of our comments tonight about recreation and those types of settings and aesthetics. And so that's where I was being sensitive to having those type settings in further back.
Well, if that same recreation area is non-participating and has no final, that's a whole different number. That's a whole nother situation, and it should be.
5,280 on this.
Well, we talked to one of the former members from Bon Homme County, and they said they wanted 2, they got 1, and they wished they had 2,
2 miles.
2 miles.
Is that for participating or non-participating?
That's non-participating. Participating people should have the freedom to do what they want to do. They want to live next to this thing, it's their right, they get the check. And the only thing they hear is this, when they open the envelope. That's fine.
Or suggested could there possibly be a, for the participating individuals, 1/3 mile? And then they would have the option, if they wish for it to be, for this unit to be closer. At least that would give a little bit more, space for somebody to be able to decide what location they want or what distance they want from it. It doesn't mean that they have to be a 1/3 of a mile, but that would be at least a minimum
Well,
max.
at the end of the day, the participant is gonna do whatever they decide with their partner, the turbine company, and that's fine. But like Sherry's quick to point out, this also includes small wind turbines that could be 100 feet, 50 feet. So I think that the X, the 1.5X makes it height proportional, so that you don't have to go way far back for just a little dinky thing.
So most of those are done with the small thing, are gonna probably be right in the backyard of the house. And
It could be.
that would be up to them where they wanted to put it.
Right, right, and there's other setbacks, but at the minimum, I think you got all distance covered. And another noise and requirements that we've already reviewed. So I think the non-participant residence is like the crux of the issue. And if a non-participant, okay, if they really need to put a turbine there, hello, Mr. and Mrs. Non-participant, we'd like to put a turbine here, and here's X to do that. You know, that gives the non-participant the leverage to negotiate with the turbine and potentially become a participant. Because if we say a short distance, that's the law of the land. It could always be less, but that's at the people's discretion, not ours.
So we're still talking about participatory.
Sir?
We're talking about future,
No, these are.
what's the effect of the electromagnetic field of these systems?
But that's the next subject.
We'll get to that. Yep, there was a question about electromagnetic field, and that's something we still need to review on our list. So, other comments. So I've got a suggestion of 2H,
2H, 1.5H.
1.5H. Don, I think you were at 1320.
Yeah, I listened to
Robert?
Robert's.
At 800 feet figure, 1.5H is 1,200 feet anyway.
Yeah.
So we're really in the same ballpark.
Yeah,
So there's a 1.5H proposal. Other thoughts at this side of the table?
I guess, question for Robert, on the height, you know, that's assuming, you know, say it could go up to 800, but if there was a limit on the height, then that's gonna bring it in closer for the turbine, and we haven't gotten that to yet.
Yeah, but I think if you have a setback based on height, you're also kind of incentivizing shorter towers. Now, I know there's more wind high, but the more wind high creates potentially, you know, the higher it goes, I think the more problems are created at the same time they're going after it. Now, they had 52% capacity factor, which was pretty darn good. That's one of the highest I've heard in prevailing winds, and they weren't all that high.
Lauren?
I would go with tower height, just because then as technology changes, we're not going in and changing things again.
Okay. Are you okay with the 1.5?
Because like he said, if it's 800, yeah, you're getting up there anyway.
Gene? Do you have thoughts on?
I'm I don't really have any comment on that. I don't have a plus or minus on that.
Okay. So I'm gonna circle the old 1.5H for setbacks from a participating residence, business, church, I think are the ones included in there. So let's go to non-participating. As Robert said, this is the tougher one.
Big kahuna.
Why not go to
2 miles?
2 miles?
Okay, so, we've discussed 1 mile or 2 miles.
So my understanding is it has to be 2 miles from a bald eagle, correct?
Yes.
I think that's correct.
Okay,
Goes with
why-
a nest.
Why? Why? Why is that? And yet, we are sitting here thinking we're gonna do less for humans? Makes no sense to me. Absolutely no sense. That we are going to protect a eagle, but yet humans, we're, well, hey, let's do a couple thousand feet. No.
Probably because humans don't fly.
Humans are affected by this.
And if they absolutely don't want anything to do with it, I think 2 miles is about as good as they're gonna get. But if they're okay, again, it gives them room to negotiate. If the wind turbine has a really good spot there, and they'd really like to put one there, they gotta go knock on the door.
Other thoughts? Sure.
This might sound radical. About 5 miles.
There was a comment from the audience at 5 miles.
I did find an ordinance, and I forgot, I have the wrong binder here, but I found an ordinance for a county that did have 5 miles. Yep.
Don or Mike or Jean?
I think if we go as high as 5 miles, you're pretty much saying you aren't gonna put one in.
Right.
Basically, it's eliminating wind power, and 2 miles probably does the same. And maybe that's the goal.
Well, the goal of a ban is a ban, but a 2 mile setback is not a ban because the wind turbine company with money bags can go knock on the door. The opportunity negotiates there and make it less. But if they don't want nothing to do with it, they should have that right to have some buffer, just like the bird.
Because it means that the wind companies would have to go, like you said, door-to-door knocking and
Yeah.
getting to people to become a participant rather than a non-participant.
And it leaves the decision in the hands of the resident.
Yep. The people who are most affected.
Because at half mile, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, the house is like a little pimple on the ground next to these things. And that's, if you don't have something to negotiate with, it's just gonna show up, tough luck.
Mike or Don?
I'd go 2.
2? Don, you have any comments?
I guess I'd go 2 at the most.
2 at the most? You do have to remember now, we are the task force. This does go to the planning commission for rehash, and it will go to the county commission for another round. So there is still multiple times again, and that's why I say this is the section that will be looked at probably the most. So for now, I'm going to circle the 2 mile. So we can move on to get it. Sometimes it's best to move through and then go back and say, does everything fit together? So let's move on to the municipalities.
Excuse me. Before you
Yes,
go
sir.
on there, that 2 miles is referring to precisely what?
For feet,
No.
or,
Are we
Property
talking
line.
about non-participants
yes,
or residents?
and a business or a church
Okay.
that's out there.
Okay, I'd like to make a comment that I think 2 miles is excessive and 1 mile would be quite adequate.
Okay, so you have to remember, we're also missing 3 of our members too.
Right.
So we will be discussing this probably at another meeting. So I'm gonna make note of what Jean said here. So municipalities, so we have two sizes of cities in our county. The big one, which is Yankton, and then you have the smallers, which Utica, Lesterville, Gayville, Vollen, and Mission Hill. And the edge of Irene. You have to remember, part of the city of Irene is also in Yankton County. So, municipality, the only reason 5280 is there is that's what solar was. So, solar, the biggest concern was glare, and much different for wind, because you can see them much higher and you can hear them. So, if we're looking at a 2-mile setback from a single participant out in the county, I would assume most people would say
Same.
a 2-mile setback from a municipality, unless you got the city board to give you a waiver.
And there's always that opportunity.
There is. So I will circle that. Lakes, rivers, and streams. Right now it says 5280, because I think, again, I got that from the solar, but I'm trying to think what,
Refresh my memory.
no, actually, it's 660 for lakes, rivers, and streams. I don't think 5280 I had in there.
What's
Gary,
it?
did I put that in there?
No, it's just got a question mark.
Okay, there we go. I was gonna say, I didn't think that was right, so there's a question right there. Don?
What's the definition of a stream? Is a blue line?
Probably blue line stream in ours, that's what we always start with, is an actual blue line stream. So, forgive me, I think I was looking at an amended version. I think I had 660 in there, which is what solar is. Let me get the right paper out here so I can follow along. Is there any reason why we wouldn't just go with the 660 that solar has?
Let me ask another question. Is there a possibility we can go to District 3 and say, with these setbacks, what are the available locations in Yankton County to put a wind farm in?
You know, Don, I think you could do that with something like lakes, rivers, and streams, but if we're gonna go participating and non-participating, unless you know which parcels are those, you just can't put a map together. And right now, we don't have that information.
Well, the lake, rivers, and streams are gonna be sources of wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that, the giant turbine can compare to the solar that's gonna just sit there. We have, there's height, there's movement, there's all kinds of differences between the two. So I don't think they should have, maybe not 2 miles, but it should be, I think, more stringent than solar.
Something you need to keep in mind for the setting up of a solar, or rather a wind power system, is that before any tower can be erected, the wildlife flyways have to be well established and considered. And I think it takes about 2 years of a study before that wind tower could even be erected.
And that's good, because in prevailing winds, they did the study after the turbines.
I don't think that's correct.
That's what he told me yesterday. So, that topic, entire topic, is not covered in our current zoning.
I
And it
think
needs to be.
we need to review that, because I'm not sure that that's correct.
But a 2-year migratory study presented to the county, I think is appropriate to get a permit. I agree.
That's a
And
fact of
with that
life.
information, they should be able to go to a landowner and say, hey, don't worry about it, look, we did this. And then get a waiver.
Just a observation from last night, with those studies that have already been completed prior to the ownership of the current property, that's another consideration. I think it should be.
The current company.
Current
Yeah,
company.
I do too.
Well, of course, they wouldn't divulge last night how many of those there were.
The other thing to keep in mind too is the fact that with all that concrete, whatever else in the ground, because I talked to an individual that is close to a wind farm, and they said with all that concrete in the ground and et cetera, it disrupted the drainage of the area tremendously. And just thinking of northern Yankton County and that area up in there, there's streams, I guess I don't know what you'd consider a stream and everything, but I think that's gotta be considered, too, is how will that affect, being really close, how will that affect the drainage of the area? So, just putting it out there.
No, I think that's a fact that is already like in the regulations for establishing a wind farm. We could verify that, but I'm pretty sure it's already part of the regulations, at least in the Bonham ones, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Of course, they have to abide by the FEMA changes too. I mean, we just had a huge reduction in land that could be built on due to FEMA. Everything kind of that way from Yankton is blue on the map now over to Gayville and, well, not quite to Gayville, but that direction.
Pretty close.
I don't have any lakes, rivers, and streams setbacks for the counties that I sent you. Either they don't have them or I failed to put them all down, but I just don't remember seeing any.
I'd be
Gary, unless
okay with
you've
the
got.
mile. I don't know that it has to be 2, but I think it should be more significant certainly than solar.
So what are other folks' thoughts on that then? Because 660 is an eighth of a mile or so.
I'd follow that.
A mile?
Well,
So let's
The
put that
lakes
in there
is-
for right
lakes is
now.
good too.
Ma'am, did you have a comment?
People
Yes,
fishing
there was a
and-
point brought up about the wildlife along the stream. I actually have the slide from last night's meeting about the studies they will do. So those species, just for your knowledge, year 1 avian use, year 1 raptor nest, year 2 avian use, year 2 raptor nest, year 1 grouse-let, year 1 passive bat, year 2 grouse-let, year 3 raptor nest. So there was not any mention nor study plan for pheasants, deer, or turkeys.
So the comment from the audience was last night during the Swan Lake public comment, they did discuss about 1-2 year studies for avian use, raptor nests, grouse, bats, but they did not mention pheasant, deer, or what was the last one?
Turkeys.
Turkeys, sorry.
Or fur bearers.
Okay. So that was the comment from the audience for you folks at home. So let us move past the lakes, rivers, and streams for right now. I am just gonna go ahead and put 1 mile in there, and like I said, we've got 3 members who we still need to go through this with. So now probably we have a right-of-way. We discussed this at the last meeting at 1.5 times the height. So this is very similar to a participating landowner, which we earlier said 1.5 height. Are we still all okay with that? All right, I'm going,
No, there's a
Mike?
2 times the height. Is that 1.5 is crossed out?
well, what did I have on?
Mine is 1.5.
That's what we discussed. Someone may have sent some changes.
Mike Wells.
Mike Welsh
That was this
had,
here.
okay. See,
Suggestions?
that's what's getting me all,
Yeah, well,
Gotcha.
that's why I printed both of these.
gotcha. So, last time when we discussed it, when I think everybody was here at the last meeting, we said 1.5 times the height for a right-of-way. So that would be your roads. So if you've got an 800-foot tower, you're 1,200 foot off the right-of-way. If you've got a 100-foot tower, you're 150 off the right-of-way. So I think we'll leave that there for now, and again, we'll revisit it again. Property line, participating and non-participating. We decided we wanted to break these into 2 parts. I had 1.25 times the height for participating property line folks, unless they give themselves an exemption.
Mike proposed 2 on that also.
Go ahead, if you,
I was just gonna say that, again, the participant is almost, again, it's just a kind of a safety thing, and they can decide what they wanna, how they wanna work that. So what is that, 2 or the 1.5?
earlier, the last meeting, we said 1.25 is what we had come to. Well, I didn't technically circle it. I think it was the last thing we were discussing, but that was on the table, was 1.25. And again, the participant can give themselves an exemption for it. The challenge is, say you own a section, but it's not platted as 640 acres. It's platted as 4 quarter sections. So if you had to follow this, you know, you couldn't put anything, even though you own it all, you couldn't put it within a certain amount of those platted property lines. But you could give yourself an exemption for it. And that would allow you to put your towers in the center as best you could to minimize your influence on your neighbors. You know, and that's why the exemptions are so key for much of it. But in the event, you know, and of course, if you put one right on the property line or just on either side and you sold a quarter, whoever's buying it knows the thing's there. So again, that's on them if they didn't go out and actually look at the property and they bought it. So, I mean, there's hedges there too.
And I like the height relationship to the setback. That's, I think, appropriate, and it accommodates the small as well as stepping back to the big.
Yep.
So, yeah, 1.25 or 1.5 is fine.
Why don't we do 1.5, that way it's the same as.
Same as the other.
Participant, 1.5.
And from right away,
1.5.
with the allowance that they can give themselves an exemption. But it has to be tied to the property. Okay, well, I'm gonna circle that then. So now it's non-participating, and I know we didn't get to this. So non-participating property line.
Mike had 5X.
I would,
No, this is not for the property line.
I would
Here's a
I'd
question
Oh, yeah,
mark.
question mark? Okay.
I'd toss out at least 1 mile. For a non-participating to the property line. That's consistent with what we did earlier.
Based on the back, you can always make a deal. I think it's better to err on the side of property rights. So I would support a mile.
Other comments?
I think a half mile given a square mile, 640 acres. If you go with 1 mile, you gotta have 4 square miles to make it work. If you had non-participants on each side, that's kind of prohibitive.
Well, unless you knock on the door and make them a participant. Instead of here in this body, take their property rights and have them do something they don't want done. You know, because it's a mile, it's just a number. All this can be negotiated between the two parties that are actually involved. And I think that the more we leave it that way, I think the less the county gets involved and the more the actual parties can negotiate.
I don't think it's realistic. Like I say, prohibitive is, and maybe that's your point, or the point.
Well, it probably increases the number of checks the wind turbine company's gonna have to write. But that's how everybody's gonna get along.
Well,
I think we also,
it can also go the other way. If your neighbor won't become a participant, you could hate him for the rest of your life because you ain't getting that $15,000
Well,
check every year.
a setback waiver is not gonna be the same as And that's what they said in prevailing wind, that the guy was getting $15,000 a turbine per year. I mean, we're not talking something like that. I mean, it would be something, I don't know, but it's not gonna be the same as having one of those monsters on your property.
No. But I'm saying if he prohibits the participant from
Like-
putting it on there because of the distance, then they could become enemies.
Well, it could happen the other way too.
Sure,
If he puts a
both ways.
turbine,
Both ways.
turbine in his backyard, he's not gonna like that either.
Yeah, both ways.
Mike's a mile. Lauren? Mile. So we're gonna circle that for now.
I think
And
you had a-
last
you
is,
had a comment on
oh, sure.
I got something to say on that. So we're dealing with distances, but we're supposed to be looking at protecting individuals as far as their property is concerned. And to me, a 1 mile setback for a non-participant isn't enough. They've gotta have more space than that, because they're dead set against those things being out there, even if they see a mile or two away. It's still something that, it's an invasion of their territory or their area, even if they don't own the land. It's an invasion of their territory, and we've gotta remember that. We've gotta go back to property rights, and that, to me, would be a very important thing to make sure that it's more than a mile, I mean, 2 miles or 3 miles, but, when you've got a whole line of red lights blinking on the horizon, 40 or 50 of them in Bonham County, I can only count 30 of them, but, there's more than that. I mean, we think about that, oh, it's all strung out there. I have the question, why aren't these companies building them where they're located instead of out here in South Dakota? What's the answer to the question?
It's where the wind blows.
It's where the wind blows, and it's also not in my backyard.
Well, it's also, it's where the wind blows pretty regular throughout the state, except for some elevational differences, but it's about transmission.
That is not true.
Because Cherry
In order
County,
to put up a
Nebraska-
wind tower, you have to put up a met tower for 2 years to prove that you have adequate wind before a company will put up the tower.
I understand, but the wind turbines are encroaching on the people because it shortens the transmission that they have to build, and it brings them closer to the markets. And Cherry County, Nebraska probably has more wind in the entire state, but it's in the middle of nowhere. And the state did not adequately have an energy plan, and they've known about that wind power in Cherry County for 50 years. But nobody ever put a plan in place to get it to where it's needed. And now they want to encroach on the population areas.
So the comment from the audience, if I can remember what you had said, was a 4 mile setback or something much greater than the 1 mile from a non-participating property line mainly because of property rights and the encroachment upon their enjoyment of their property in a nutshell.
When you're in a situation where you've got neighbors around you that feel the same way, you know, there might not be a place to be able to put another wind tower, because that area does not want it there. There could be one participant, yeah, but then the rest of the people feel like, okay, you got that mill there for you, that's fine, but the rest of us, we don't wanna have anything to do with it.
Ma'am, did you have a comment quick?
I just agree with that gentleman, because if you have an 800-foot tower, 1 mile isn't that far, but just to see this 800-foot tower, I mean, it's gonna be like staring you in the face if it's only a mile away.
So the comment from the audience is she agreed with the gentleman's request to make a longer setback because an 800-foot tower is right in your face at 1 mile setback, so.
And go from that standpoint, but to say they couldn't end up building them taller than 800, I mean, this is the initial, or the thing that's going on now. Look how it's grown in size over the past several years.
So the last one is the flood zone, and solar's prohibited in the flood zone. I don't think we prohibit towers in a flood zone.
Is a flood zone the same as a wetland?
No. Flood zone is, if you own a home in a flood zone, you have flood insurance. but it's not the same as a wetland, because not all flood zones are wetlands.
And there's, if it's in an A zone, there's some requirements that you would have to build at least a foot above the base flood elevation and things, so that's why they're generally prohibited. We'd have to specify to me that we're talking about not putting them, prohibiting from zone A's. That's basically what you're talking about, or floodways. Because floodways, you'd have to have an engineering certificate saying there's a no rise certification. And in an A zone, you'd have to elevate them, which, I don't know how you elevate them with a 25-foot, 20-foot, 12-foot concrete block on the bottom of it.
So Gary was, because you don't have a microphone back there, do you, Gary? Was talking about A zones and floodways, et cetera. So I think that we need to do a little more investigation into if the feds have any rules around it before we probably tackle that one. I looked in
It seemed to
our,
me, he mentioned yesterday that they could not build in flood zones.
okay, so we need to clarify that probably before we even discuss that. I don't see
I'll get that
Well,
for the
anything in
flood-
our tower deal.
Flood zones are generally the lowest
Right.
terrain
Right.
around.
Yeah, yeah,
So
you're right,
Which is
Don.
the opposite of where they're looking, but I don't think we need a mile setback from a
It's
flood zone.
No.
structure, and you would need a floodplain development permit, and you would have to meet the
Correct.
requirements and things.
Yep, so we may not even need to list it in
Just refer to those other
our
requirements.
zone. So let's take a little bit closer look at that. So, we've got 10 minutes left.
Can I have a question?
Sir,
Okay, we got the wind farms over here in Crofton. You go 46. 5 miles east on 46 and 81, you can see them. That's 30 miles away.
yes, sir, so the comment was if you're 5 miles east and a little bit north of the 4681 intersection, you can see the towers in Crofton. Okay, so I live out by Beaver Lake, and I can see those towers, and I can count with my bino, I can see the towers out in Avon from where I live, which, so, I mean, so you can draw your box as big as you want, so. Let us, I think the next one is 6, electromagnetic interference, and maybe we can squeeze this one in the last 8 minutes. So it is item 6 in our current ordinance, right after setbacks. Electromagnetic interference. The permittee shall not operate the WEX so as to cause microwave, television, radio, or navigation interference contrary to FCC regulations or other law. In the event such interference is caused by the WEX or its operation, the permittee shall take the measures necessary to correct the problem. Does that say enough to address electromagnetic interference? Okay, we'll start with the task force first.
I think so.
Is there something major that's missing before you comment? Anybody know of anything?
As far as the hardware, I think it's worded well for what it covers. I guess the question is, does it cover everything? Are there human health concerns, or are there other things that may be measurable tomorrow that aren't measurable today?
So does yours revolve around human health?
Yes, regarding the effects on human beings, animals, everything. And this is research that is just now starting to come out by some people who have been looking at it for a few years and come together. And, it's possible with the frequency that's coming, that's associated with the power of that outlet up there, to be able to kill human cells very easily. That's 60 cycle. Now, that's what the cycle is of most of the generators, because the 60 cycles of the service all the way around. So if you can take and kill human cells with 60 cycle, 60 hertz signal life, it's a matter of concentration, it's a matter of location, the form, what type of wiring, how is the wiring shielded to reduce that exposure. All of those things that were mentioned in that document you just read about there, that would be for like
Okay, so I'm gonna stop you there. I think we get your point. The gentleman in the audience was discussing in depth the human health concerns. But one thing I will say is when you live in a city, there's power lines everywhere. I own land, my husband and I own land out by Utica. We have 10 WAPA towers on our property. Okay, so they were there when we moved there, so it's our own fault. We're living by electricity. But we have that. Now, the other thing is we have setbacks. And part of the reason you have a setback, one is the sight, the sound, that, so, adding more on that, more regulation in our ordinance, that's the question is, do you just keep adding and adding, or do you say we have taken the proper precautions with the setbacks to protect the people? If they choose to reduce those setbacks, so be it.
I agree with that. The more aggressive setback alleviates the county from having to worry about some of these other issues because of the distance that people have the opportunity to have from the things. So you're absolutely right.
I also do this all day too.
You're also, but that's your choice.
Exactly, that's exactly right.
And people have the choice to be 2 miles away, so I think that alleviates a lot of this. However, we may want to put a catch-all in there, or, like it says, or other documented deleterious impacts. Or something that can be shown 10 years from now with some fancy gauge that we don't know about now.
What was that fancy word you threw out there?
Deleterious negative impacts or negative health impacts.
I'm gonna do my best to spell that.
Deleterious.
Deleterious, there you go. I was not an English major, so.
Some things I remember.
If you threw out a quadratic equation, I'd get that one.
I got an engineer, I'm gonna make a note.
I have to remember where I went to school. So, all right, with that, we only have 4 minutes left. And so I think we're gonna end the conversation there.
Well,
One
I think
thing-
we should,
oh,
are we there on lighting? Or we did
We
that?
already did that.
I think that's good. Now,
we
when we
went-
say preferred manner, is that like, would you please, or can we say they need to have?
Okay,
Need to have, I think
on
that
set,
should
on
be-
lighting,
Yes,
okay.
because preferred is like, I don't think that's clear.
So I think because we went through 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And on my list, we had 5, 6, which we did tonight, and we have decommissioning 13. That'll be a big one.
That'll be on the whole
And then
thing.
19's the last one, and it's not it didn't look like a major thing, it looked more like a catch-all thing. So with that said, I did want to make one comment, and there's been thrown around the word ban quite a bit. And I do want to, and I know, and I sent a couple emails to folks who had come out and said, well, we need to ban this. And one thing you have to remember, and I stated it earlier, is we are going through and recommending things. And this will go to the Planning Commission, this will go to the County Commission. So our job is to go through the ordinance and to mitigate the risks. That is what this is mitigating risks. And I think what we'll do is once we go through everything and we get all the red lines done, and I might even try to reorganize it so it kind of matches what the solar says, that last meeting, I think it would be wise to take a vote. And if your number one recommendation is to ban, then you would vote for it. And we would report that as part of our recommendations. But this is how we mitigate the risk we identified. So that gives the Planning Commission and the County Commission consideration to say, well, we had a task force of 9 people, and so many of them felt this isn't the right thing for our county. But if the Planning Commission and the County Commission, and ultimately the people, because they can vote to send it to an election, if those entities feel that wind is okay for our county, but we're gonna do this to mitigate the risks. So that's really our job here, is to go through all of this, even if in the back of our minds, we think, this isn't right for Yankton County.
Well, I think that's true from a safety, best practices, industrial standards, but we're also converting public input and feeling into these pages too. If people
Correct.
don't want it, we shouldn't be telling them they should.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
When we get done, of 9 of us, it might be 9-0. We don't want this. It might be 5-4 or 4-5
And it
or
gives them
whatever it
Plan
is.
A. Like, we're hearing this is Plan A, we say no. Plan B, if you don't think we should do that, this is our best
Then
plan.
this is our best plan. And so, and I think looking at it that way is what encourages a good discussion, because if this is coming to our county, these are the things we need to watch out for. Even though I don't support it, if the majority of people support it and think this is the right thing for the county, our state, our nation, please take these things into consideration. So keep that in mind as we go through. I know sometimes I feel like I'm pushing and I don't address and say, we're not even gonna entertain a ban. I think we will at some point, but our first job is to walk through the ordinance. So with that said, next time, do you want to start with setbacks again, or do you want to get through the decommissioning and then circle back to the
I
setbacks?
think you go to decommissioning, that's big.
Okay, so next Thursday, 4 o'clock, decommissioning, and look at what is in the wind and in the solar, because I think we'll probably start with what's in the solar. So entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming.